And he wanted an update about how things have been going. And so, sorry, I have a little bit of a cold. And so one of the things that we talked about was really about the feedback that you all have received to date, the work of the subcommittees, and some things we're hearing in the field. And so to give a little bit of context, as you all know, this has been a conversation in the state of Tennessee for a very long time. And so you think about the BEP Review Committee reports dating back to 2004. And, they meet quarterly. We've had meetings as the BEP Review Committee for years and years and years, very consistent recommendations over that period of time. The governor and I talked about just how consistent those recommendations are. We also talked a little bit about the Haslam Task Force, and that was that more traditional task force. And of course, in 2014-15, that lasted just over a year. People came, experts came, people testified to a specific committee. They put out that task force committee report that you all had a chance to review. Also had very similar recommendations in terms of a student-based formula and some of the additional components that we might want to weight. And in looking at your meetings, being able to look at your recommendations, seeing that level of consistency and stability in recommendations over time, and frankly, over a period of over 15 years, I think was a really reinforcing point for the governor in terms of it is time to kind of take that next step, really look towards potential action moving into this session. So I know the last 3 months have been jam-packed. There's been a lot that has been discussed. But I did want to put it in that frame of reference and context that this has been, as I do not know as well as most of you on the call, a conversation that has been in place for years and years in the state. And it's been actually, I think, really important to see that there has been that stability and consistency in recommendations. In terms of kind of what he addressed in that meeting, he did say very clearly on the record, this is about public school funding. This is not about vouchers and ESAs. I brought that up as a concern that we've heard. I brought up the concern about kind of the funding, the size of the pie, so to speak. And I think he really reinforced the point that we need to make sure we have a formula that we believe in, that when the legislature wants to invest more funding, they feel good about the strategy of investing in that formula. And once we know what that formula is, then we have a really good moment in time to also talk about how much money should go into that formula. So I thought that was a really positive response from him in that space. And then we talked a lot about the local match. And I know that's not something we're talking about in these subcommittees, but did want to address that we have had 8 additional community meetings, less so town halls across the state. And where we are right now is thinking through, if we need to know how much the state is going to put in, we need to know what that state formula is, and then how much money that is before we can start having the conversation about what that local contribution might be. And so the current proposal is to say, let's get a formula, let's see how much money that will be, and then over the course of the next 12 months, work very closely with local communities about what their local match would be, if it changes, if it doesn't change, and giving them a 5-year runway for that. Most states give kind of that 1 to 3 year runway, but we think having a 5-year runway for any potential change will be important for planning purposes. So he and I, the governor and I, talked a little bit about what that could look like as well. He was incredibly optimistic about the work of the subcommittees. You all have been doing a lot of work, of course, and reading a lot of reviews. And so wanted to talk through the next kind of month of this 4-month-ish process and what is to come from there. And so a preview of what that will be. We have meeting number 4 next week. That is going to review these initial feedback buckets and provide prioritization within each category. So you all have done a great job of saying, here are all the things that we would like to see funded in a new formula, but now we need to prioritize because there are limited resources available. And so what is it that might get funded now versus what might be recommendations for the future? And then really getting some additional requested resources. Obviously, you've had quite a big dump of those right before the break. Requests for the expert input and any additional public comment for meeting 4. Right in between meeting 4 and meeting 5, the department will put out a draft formula based on what your feedback is, and certainly the feedback we're getting from the steering committee. That will not include dollars. And I want to make super clear, it will not include dollars. That is something that would need to be decided by the governor and the General Assembly. That would likely come at the state of the state or after if it moves forward. This would just be what the framework would look like. It will allow a week of public comment on that framework based on the feedback of you all from meetings 1 through 4. And then meeting 5, you'll have the opportunity to review whatever public comment has come in on that framework and then make any final recommendations on that formula framework. And then meeting 6, the final last meeting, is about the the policy considerations. And so that is, how do you want to define economically disadvantaged or an English learner? How do we think about what is rural versus what is not rural? I'm assuming that remains as a weight. There's lots of different ways to look at that. And so that gets really into how do you want to think about student characteristics and make sure that there's a clear definition. It also gets a little bit into what are the supports, resources, professional development that our districts, community members, school board members might need in order to move forward productively with a new formula. So again, meeting 4 is getting like a really good first draft feedback on what that will look like. Then we have community feedback in between meeting 4 and meeting 5. Meeting 5, you'll have final recommendations using that community feedback. And then meeting 6 is about the policy considerations that would go with that. So I want to take a pause there. I think I saw a hand raised, but want to see if there are any questions before we just briefly go through meeting 4. And again, apologize for my scratchy voice. Any questions? Okay, so we will go to the next slide and just talk about kind of the prioritization and the process for meeting 4. And so thinking about that, we're going to finalize those supports and services. So within like your base, so that's looking at your nurses, your school psychologists, your counselors. I think a lot of those SROs came up quite a bit. Teacher salaries, benefits, and insurance was also something that I've heard come up quite a bit and seen in the recommendations. This is when you want to prioritize within that bucket and say, these are the things that absolutely must happen versus this is really what should be included versus this is a nice to have, but not necessarily something we need to do right now. And this is the thing where I kind of put it as everything else, where it's a long shot, but let's stick it in there and see. And you're going to do that with the base, you'll do that with the weights, then you'll do that with any directed funding. Now, I think some things that we've been hearing is there's a lot of things that are split. So for example, SROs, whether it was the town halls or community feedback, we've heard a lot of split things there. So something you might also want to think through, and we've heard some good comments, especially in some of the recent public comment, is that you don't necessarily have to pick a thing. We've heard some good ideas around having a general bucket. So some of our very small communities might want to prioritize a principal, but if you think about our larger school districts, they already have a principal funded in the current BEP. And so is there some flexible funds where those who want an SRO are able to fund that, those who don't maybe pick something different? And so it doesn't have to be that you're funding a specific resource. It can just be additional funding to support one of a collection or catalog of things. And so think through, and I think if as chairs, if you can really direct your groups to think through how they might want to consider that funding or what that funding might be. I think one of the really great pieces of feedback we've heard in the public comment has been, can there just be a dollar allotment per student? And that might cover one of a range of things. And then the district can make the best decision on what makes sense on how that funding should occur. So those are all things that I think are going to be important to think about in the base. In terms of how we're thinking about the funding of the base, I just want to be very clear. Anything that is currently funded in the BEP or outside of the BEP will absolutely be included in any proposal moving forward. There is no scenario that we are considering at this time where we would reduce something that's currently funded in lieu of something else. That's a question that we get a lot. So this would all be additional things that you might want to see in a new formula. For the weights, I want to just, if you all are kind of thinking through that, I'm really thinking through kind of prioritization within the weights. I think one of the things is there was a lot of things that people want weighted, and now we really need to push into what gets weighted a little bit more. Concentration of poverty versus poverty, students with disabilities, rural, what are the proportional weights that make sense? So, and you don't have to have an exact percent, but if your committees can start to think through, if we have a child with a disability, they really need more per student, significantly more than, let's say, another child. So want to be able to pause here and see if you have questions on what that prioritization can look like.
Commissioner, this is Danny Weeks.
Yes. Hey, Danny.
Did I understand you to say everything that's currently included in the BEP, there's no need for us to go back through that list and make sure those are on the must-have list? Those are already included, so don't spend time or waste time with those items.
That's right. So what we've said to the governor is if it's in the BEP or it's funded outside of the BEP, like VPK or coordinated school health, all of that would be in any proposal. This would just be new things on top.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, great clarification. Thanks, Danny.
This is Commissioner, this is Randy Boyd, just to make sure I'm clear on my instructions. So we've got these 4 different buckets, and within each, we're going to force rank what like on the must-haves. We'll force rank the priorities. We have 10. The highest one will be first, and so the order matters. There's nothing more than just the rank. There's no other grid like here's how it ranks on 5 different variables. Just one ranking.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be, I think if you said like, look, these are our top 3 or 4 and these are our next categories, that's fine too. Don't feel like you have to really wrestle between number 1 and number 2. I think it's more just within the must-haves, should-haves, nice-to-haves, or long shots. And each of your groups are thinking about somewhat different things. So like our urbans versus our rurals. So we wanted to make it really kind of organic to whatever you feel is the biggest priorities within those big buckets.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. Okay, we'll go to the next slide. So just the feedback summary. And so you'll get a couple different buckets of comment, just so you know what to expect. So you'll have some after meeting 4, you'll have some again between meeting 4 and 5, and that will really be after by meeting 5. That's your last kind of big bucket for public comment. Public comment officially ends January 14th. It's that 1 week that gives them the public a chance to really engage with any kind of proposed structure of a new formula. And then you all will just work with that, with whatever is submitted by that point. So these are the kind of consolidated ideas, and you'll see that in the deck that you received. But it's the overall feedback, and you'll see those lines in the sand. No one should get less than what they receive now in terms of districts. Anything that's funded now should remain funded. We need to give locals a much longer runway in terms of any change there, and districts would still get their maintenance of effort. So districts where their locals fund more than what the minimum is, you can't decline. So you can't supplant the funding that the state might add with the local. The local still has to put in the same amount. So you'll see that in just kind of some overall recommendations that have come in pretty strongly across the state. And then you'll see what those recommendations currently look like in the base, the weights, the directed funding, and in outcomes. A couple things I want to note is, as we said, within each of those categories, just bucket them into like the biggest priorities, next biggest, et cetera. For the outcomes section in particular, the big push we got from the steering committee was on literacy. I think everyone was really excited about completion of post-secondary and statewide dual credit and dual enrollment opportunities, but there is, I think, a really some kind of concern in how we might think about early literacy and what outcomes might look like for that. But the steering committee was very, very interested in getting some clear recommendations on how we could incentivize outcomes in that K-2 or K-3 space. From the department's perspective, just to be very transparent, we don't want to use the universal screener that was passed last year as any kind of high stakes test. It's intended to be a checkpoint along the year. It's not intended to be a high stakes test. And so, or assessment of any kind. And so really thinking through how we might look at those early grades in a way that isn't the same as like the standardized high stakes test, but really value outcomes based for literacy is a good problem of practice that we have all been assigned. So I wanted to just make sure to note that in particular. And then everything else you'll see on the slides in terms of what the current recommendations are. I want to acknowledge not everything is on the list in terms of the current recommendations. This is the consolidation of all 18 subcommittees and what you've been talking about, and then the feedback we've gotten from the steering committee. So if there's something else you want to see on that list, please make sure you continue to add it as we get tighter and tighter. So I will pause there. I think you have these. I'm not going to go through each of these slides, but Chelsea will kind of ping through in case there are any specific questions on any of these. The overall feedback, again, any broad recommendations, the base, anything else you would want to include as an addition to what is already being funded. And then looking at the weights, we did see, I think, a really strong focus on unique learning needs. So you'll see that a lot of those needs are together as one kind of major bucket that includes economically disadvantaged, students with disabilities, English learners, and dyslexia. To be clear, if you hit each of those, you would get funded for every single thing. So it's not like you just get one. So if you are economically disadvantaged, you would get a weight. If you have disabilities, you would get a weight. If you are an English learner, you would also get a weight. And if you also had dyslexia, you would get a weight. It's just bucketed under one category of unique learning needs. And then rural sparsity is one that I would encourage, especially the rural areas and some of the other, maybe Danny, you and Steve, your teams as well. Whether or not to include sparsity, we've had some mixed feedback on sparsity and small LEA, and so I think some additional feedback on that would be really, really helpful. And then charter enrollment, obviously, student choice and voice will spend a lot of time on that. But if there's anything missing in these weights, that's going to be a really important point of conversation. And then how you want to think about who should get a higher weight or a heavier weight will be a really important feedback. Additional dollars or directed funding. The most feedback we've gotten is the fast growing. Lots of places in Tennessee are growing really, really fast, as you all know. Lots of businesses are moving here. And so that's something that I think has been a really important point that's come through. A lot on CTE. And again, to I think Danny's question or Director Weeks' question, sorry, Danny, is that we have the CTE that's already in the base. That won't change, but should there be additional dollars on top of that, specifically for middle school, we've heard a lot about, and then obviously to maintain some of these innovative programs that we got from ESSER funding. And then we've heard a lot on the high dosage tutoring that will start a year from this spring. It is currently not funded in the budget, but it is required for those students who are at the below level. So making sure that that is included in a new formula because it is a mandate. So that's something that we wanted to make sure was highlighted there. I talked through the outcomes. Love any feedback y'all have on this. I will take any and all feedback. I think we all will. What should be included, what shouldn't be included. But I will say the biggest policy decision that we need to make here is whether or not this is open to all students or it is limited just to those students who are typically lower performing or are part of an achievement gap conversation. That is a very serious split in the feedback we've received so far. Half of the feedback believes adamantly that it should only be students who are low income and or students with disabilities and or English learners. Half of the feedback we've received said, no, we need to incentivize any student who meets these various achievement metrics because we want to get all of our kids to be to meet kind of the post-secondary outcomes. So both have strong merit and rationale. I think it's going to be up to the subcommittees. I think we're really, really relying on you. The steering committee and the governor have all said really looking to what your feedback and consult will be in terms of, is it just we're rewarding outcomes for students who have traditionally performed lower or those students who meet it no matter what? There is a financial difference, but I don't want us to think about that as much as I'd like us to think about from a philosophy perspective, how do we want to approach this in Tennessee? Closing the achievement gap, all students. Again, both are really worthy arguments and I think perspectives, but we really need good feedback on that. It is split 50-50 right now and very strong feelings on both sides, which I understand. So wanted to make that as a special note. And then the last kind of part of this is just any questions that you all might have as you're facilitating meeting 4. Again, this is a critical meeting because you got a lot of content in the last couple of weeks, and it really is about these your recommendations to get to a final draft, first draft, if that makes sense, that would go out to the public. Either Chelsea Samurai will be joining the meetings this week, just to kind of pop in, see if there are any questions from subcommittee members. I will get to all of you within the next 3 meetings, but there's some overlap, so it might take me to meeting 6 to get there. But also just wanted to say I really appreciate, I know how much time's gone into this. I also know how many years have gone into this conversation. And so it's that I always make this bad joke, and I made it with the governor, and I won't stop myself now from making bad jokes. But it is that kind of night before the wedding where you get there's the, oh gosh, I think this is really going to happen. And then it gets a little bit more real. And so it's been a lot of years that we've been talking about this. And I think it is time to do something really big for kids. And it's this process has been, I know, a 3 to 4 month process that is faster than what we've seen in other states, but it is a fast kind of end to what I think has been a very long process. And so hopefully we can make a big investment that will help kids. Hopefully we can have a strategic formula that ensures that we're getting really strong return on our investments. And that we can really increase the number of students who are post-secondary ready and thriving after they graduate from our amazing pre-K through 12 schools. So I'm feeling optimistic, and I thank you for your being so generous with my scratchy voice and the cameo that my dad has made 3 or 4 times now, walking back and forth. I appreciate that as well, but happy to answer any questions that y'all have today. I'm seeing the same 6 faces, so it's nice to see y'all.
Hey, Commissioner Swain, this may have been something that's somebody submitted already, or a conversation that I just missed, but is conversations around modifying HOPE within our purview?
I'm sorry, modifying HOPE?
The HOPE scholarship.
Yeah, I think that would, yes. I think that is within the purview, because I think this becomes a much broader conversation and would really welcome, I think, that feedback. Absolutely.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Of course.
Commissioner, on the other end of the spectrum, what about expanding VPK and early childhood opportunities? That's come up actually from more of our business folks, even that because of the workforce issues of not having more childcare opportunities. So is that something we should talk about? Or
it absolutely is something you should talk about. It's also something that I think we've heard there's been like kind of that right on the surface, but I think really making, if like, let's say the business community said this is something really important, that would be, I think, a really critical piece of feedback. Since we fund VPK now, there is some federal funding that may be available. The state may choose to take that funding. I think it is a really important point. The part that I would encourage you to include in that is whether or not you want it in the formula, you want it to stay outside of the formula, whether you want it to expand or stay consistent, and whether it should just be 4-year-olds or 3-year-olds. But anything related to VPK is going to be really, really helpful feedback.
thank you.
And welcomed. Yeah. And sorry, for those, I realize for those of you who might not have that, there's been some federal funding potentially that states can choose to take or not choose to take. It is short-term one-time funding, but it does set up the need for, I think, more consistent investments after that 5-year period. And so states are deciding how much, if any, of that funding they want to take. And so this would be a really important part of our conversation if we were to include VPK in the formula or to expand it. We have some short-term federal funding to help us over the next 5 years, and the General Assembly would have to consider what that investment would be over time, and any policy considerations related to academics. Do we treat it more like a K through 12 model versus a VPK model? Some of that would also be part of the conversation, but there's a lot of federal funding for the next 5 years specifically to expand pre-K.
And I know this will be a question I'll get from the business folks. Will there be a lot of strings attached or oversight if we access those federal funds, or carte blanche? Here's a bunch of money. Go expand VPK.
That is a really important and great question. I'm going to watch how I answer that. I think that is going to be the decision point on whether a lot of states choose to take the money. I think the fewer strings the more likely more states will participate. I think that is something that they're going back and forth on in terms of, is the money going to be to open doors to completely different policy things they're trying to force into states or not? My personal view on this is, if we want to expand pre-K and that's what the money is for, then let's make sure we just stay focused on kids. So I'm optimistic that that's how they'll approach it. And then our General Assembly and Governor can make a decision on whether that is something they want to participate in. But I'm hopeful we keep it just about kids. Surprise, surprise. That's my perspective.
Thank you.
Look at me, Jared. I'm optimistic going into 2022.
I like it.
Questions? Yeah. Other questions, concerns, things that are coming up in your subcommittees. We're doing lots, I'm having lots and lots of conversations, just trying to make sure that we get to the end of January and that you all get whatever you need. We did finish the scopes for the additional support. And so just make sure you talk to Dominique or Jamie or Penny or Janice about any kind of expert support that you might want over the next couple of weeks. And we'll make sure to coordinate that on the department's end. All right, well, with that, I do want to have a special thank you to Farrah, Scott, Nancy, Jared, Janet, Danny, and Randy, because I've seen your faces the whole time and they have been just so wonderful and pleasant. So I appreciate that. And just want to say thank you. I know it's been a sprint in a time when lots of other things are happening. And so just, again, very, very much appreciate this. I know how important this is to you all because you've been doing this for a lot longer in Tennessee than I have, but even the 3 years now that I've been here, I know that this can be just a game changer for our kids, and they need it right now. It is, I feel, a really strong sense of urgency coming out of the pandemic, and still in it, but thinking about acceleration and recovery. We really need to invest in kids and make sure that they have every opportunity possible. It's, I think, the most important investment that any state can make right now, looking at some of the data that we're looking at. So thank you to those of you who are in schools doing the hard work, coming back from break. I know it's going to be a push, and so appreciate what you're going to be coming up against next week, and we will all do this together. And for those of you who've been donating just dozens and dozens of hours on top of all the work you're doing, know that it's making a difference, and I confident and optimistic we are going to get something big done. So just want to say thank you again, and please stay healthy and safe over the next week. And we will be back together next week because, you know, education does not end and we do not rest. So thank you all. Appreciate it. Bye. Bye-bye.
New Year.
Happy New Year.